welcome to another episode of Some of Our Parts, the podcast where two friends talk about the movies that add up to make us who we are. I'm Lindsay,
And I'm Jim.
and this week it is Jim's pick. So, Jim, tell us what you had us watch.
Well, for a couple of reasons. One, because of maybe the political climate of the day. That's a big one. And then also, this movie has a very personal impact on me. I picked from 1976 All the President's Men. And a little
Nice.
backstory. One of the reasons when this story transpired is if anyone doesn't know about Watergate, sorry, you should read your history books.
Mhm.
um, the summer of 1973, when a lot of things came out in the Watergate hearings, I spent that summer in Washington, D.C., visiting my older sister and her husband. And for the majority of the time, we've sat in front of the TV and watched the Watergate hearings and read the Washington Post every day, which they received as a newspaper. So I felt like I was a front row, seat to the to history unfolding. So
Mhm. Mhm.
and now it seems like, I hate to say it, maybe history is repeating itself.
I was going to say, I'm sure at that time you were like, "Wow, what a low for our country." And yet,
It really, especially to a young person like me. I was 16. I was a
mhm.
sophomore in high school, but yeah. And then for, my sister who's, in her mid 20s, and my brother-in-law, yeah, it was like, oh my gosh, what's happened? What's happened to
We've
our
fallen
country?
so far, and here we are, digging lower and lower.
So that being said, when the movie did come out, I just graduated from high school, and I remember going to go see it. Oh, because of, it's, oh well, this is recent history for me. And
Mhm.
then, like I said, I felt like I had a front row seat to it. So with you though, so do you recall the first time you'd watched the movie?
Yeah, I watched it for the first time just a couple of years ago in a screenwriting class that I took. So we
Oh,
watched it
okay.
and we read the screenplay, and we also read an excerpt. So the screenwriter of this movie, William Goldman, very famous screenwriter, wrote a lot of other things. Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. Um, he wrote the books and the movies for Marathon Man and The Princess Bride. So kind of
Oh.
a lot of iconic things. He also wrote a book called Adventures in the Screen Trade about his life as a screenwriter. And there's a whole chapter about all the president's men because this was quite an undertaking for him
I'm
for a lot of
sure.
reasons. He kind of got recruited onto it by Robert Redford because they'd done Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, and then Robert Redford was like, "I want you to." Robert Redford had purchased the rights, so Woodward and Bernstein, who are the journalists, for people who don't know, again, you should Google it, but they're the journalists that kind of broke this story in the Washington Post. They're the main characters of this movie, and they wrote a book called All the President's Men, kind of covering all of this. Robert Redford bought the rights to it and hired William Goldman to write it. He was going to produce the movie, and obviously he's one of the stars of the movie. And there was a lot of stuff. Like, one, William Goldman was like, "We like just finished talking about Watergate. Like, does anybody want more Watergate at this
Mm,
point?" And like, it's not, the book is not like written as like a story that would translate well to a movie, right? There's not this like kind of beginning, middle, and end. There's no dialogue in it. So a lot he has to kind of come up with. He had to get like people in the Washington Post to agree to it, and like there was stuff they didn't like. He thought, I think when I was reading, he talked with Carl Bernstein about how like all the guys who did the scheme were like so bumbling kind of idiots, and he was like, it's almost like a comic opera, and like Bernstein did not like hearing anything comic about it because it's like, this is serious. And then Carl Bernstein at the time was dating. He eventually married and then cheated on and da da da. Nora Ephron, who people might know as a also a pretty famous writer. She wrote, for example, a novel and then a movie, Heartburn, about Carl Bernstein cheating on her. So um, they rewrote William Goldman's draft, which he was not like thrilled about. Then once the director Alan Pakula was on, he wanted to like keep rewriting everything. So he was like, we're getting close to making the movie. This is the time when it should be you're like narrowing down on the script. And he's like, we are all over the place. And all the issues with it were he was like, I thought that like Hollywood was bad with gossip, but Washington is just as bad, if not worse. So he said that he was like walking somewhere, he was like in like CBS, the CBS building with someone he knew, and he walked past Walter Cronkite, and he was like, "Oh, Walter Cronkite's like, oh, I heard you have some script troubles." Like, so this was an undertaking, but eventually it was made, and William Goldman was like, it very closely resembled what I wrote. Like, obviously there's always some ad libs and stuff, but he's like, this is the movie I wrote, and like people seem to like it. So, and he obviously then won the Oscar for best adapted screenplay. So, at least there was something like a light at the end of the tunnel, but definitely quite an under, and I can see why. Also, the other thing he said was like, there's so many names, which
Mhm.
is true. Like when I was taking notes, I was like, wait, which one is this? And
That
like
was
some of the
the other.
content, it's dry.
It is, but and I remember as it played out, in real life, it was always, you got to know the names after a while, but it was like, it was Ehrlichman and Halderman and Dean and Mitchell and Colson and
Liddy and Hunt.
Hunt and just all these, yeah, and of course they were all lawyers. They were all, involved with in politics at some point or in some manner. So yeah,
Mm.
they did sort of run together. And I remember during watching the hearings, you finally then got to put a face with a name, and then
Mhm.
you sort of got that in mind. So,
Mhm.
but
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, I feel like
so
I needed one of those. I need like a chalkboard with the red string to like connect everybody.
well, later on in the movie, and there's a scene where I don't know if they're in Bob Woodward's apartment or Carl Bernstein's, but there's something with like sticky notes or little
Hmm.
things like all over, like covering it, and I'm wondering if that's where was is that with the way they sort of had this piece together. So
Yeah. Yeah.
so
Yeah, it must have been. So it definitely does feel very relevant though. It's funny too, because watching it, it's like, oh wow, like that wouldn't happen again. So there's some stuff that I'm like, that wouldn't happen again. And it's because so much changed after Watergate. Like so much of like the like
right.
election finance law and like stuff like that
Hmm.
exists because of this.
Yeah, this was like, I mean, I'm sure things had gone on before, but this is the first time that it had been brought into public light.
Yeah. I also just thought of when Nixon was like, but it's not illegal if the president does it. And I guess now that is the law, unfortunately.
Yeah, if
Imagine I'm imagining our current court existing in like 1972 and not feeling great about it.
well, even as we get in this story in Watergate thing, and they talk about, it's the whole intelligence community is involved.
Mm-hmm.
The FBI, the CIA, the Secret Service, all
Mm-hmm.
the
Department of Justice.
Department of Justice. It's everybody sort of in on the gag, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
And then either turning a blind eye to things or a deaf ear. So.
Yeah. If not
Um,
actively involved.
yeah, if not actively involved, but it's like yeah, there's a true conspiracy,
Mm-hmm.
to
Mm-hmm.
keep this under wraps.
Yeah.
So
And to sort of have that plausible deniability, right? Like all this, the directions coming from the White House, but they have to be able to like, throw a stone and hide their hand,
right,
and to not, so that no one can say, oh, wait, this came
yeah,
from the White House. Like that's blatantly illegal. Like,
yeah, that no, yeah, you can't, you can't do that. Well,
mm-hmm.
we did, we just
Yeah.
yeah. So as it bore out, so
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Uh, I'll just note before we go on too, I mentioned the director Alan Pakula. He also directed Clute. That is a movie that came out before this that won Jane Fonda her first Oscar. More recently, Sophie's Choice, Presumed Innocent, The Pelican Brief. He also was a producer on To Kill a Mockingbird,
oh, I did not know that.
which
So
was one of our recent ones we watched. So, because I was like, this name looks familiar. But yeah, so just throwing that out there. So he's a veteran of the sort of legal thriller, it appears.
yeah, not a lot of lighthearted movies in that selection, is there? So
No, not at all. Yeah, Sophie's Choice, real
Yeah.
upper.
Yeah. Well, the other ones that you mentioned as well, Clute, about a brutal murder and,
Yeah.
a stalker and so on. So, yeah. So
Yes, yes.
this guy had a flair for the dramatic, evidently. So,
For sure, for sure. But yeah, so I guess for people who aren't familiar with like Watergate generally, like what happened.
thank your
I'll say
history
what
teacher.
yeah. I didn't we didn't learn that much about Watergate when I was in school. So this I feel like I've learned more about Watergate from like this movie and like White House plumbers than school. Um
Okay.
yeah, I feel like we get to like the civil rights movement and then it kind of fizzles. And then, I
And then
also
stuff
was
happened.
yeah, I was like in school, like I was in high school like post 9/11, so like there was a lot of recent history to talk about.
I get you. So,
Um
yeah. So, yeah,
but yeah,
because,
I feel like we didn't really learn about Watergate in school when I was in school. So I will share some of what I know. You can fill in the gaps. So
oh, no, it's
June 6th, was it 16th or 17th?
17th.
17th, 1972. There's a break-in at the Watergate complex. First of all, also, this is why every scandal has gate at the end, even though this wasn't called Water, like it's called Watergate because the building was called like the Watergate complex.
Right.
So like
Yeah.
they didn't add gate onto something, but now we add gate onto
Yeah.
everything. Um, so the Democratic National Committee had an office there, and basically this group of dudes that were indirectly, like if you trace it up, they were hired by Nixon, who was the president going for re-election. They were hired by him to sort of break in and take stuff and kind of sabotage ultimately the Democratic campaign. Basically they were found out, and basically again as you see in this movie that it sort of the conspiracy kind of goes all the way to the top. So you have people like John Mitchell, who was at one point the attorney general, but he left to run Nixon's reelection campaign. You have his chief of staff, you have like White House counsel,
hmm
and then
Director of communications.
director of communications. Was John Dean White House counsel also?
He was one of the White House counsel.
Yeah.
Correct. Yeah.
He was one of the people though that like
hmm
flipped. And so
Flipped.
he
Yeah.
kind of he kind of came out looking good. He's still often on CNN. Whenever there's like presidential corruption to be discussed, he's their go-to guy.
Well,
Um
hey, you
he
got to go to
knows
the subject matter
firsthand.
expert. Exactly.
But yeah, and then lots of other people that they had sort of brought in who had worked for like the CIA and FBI and stuff like that. Like
Yeah.
that's like Liddy and Hunt, people like that who kind of helped like mastermind this. And I would say this movie has a serious tone to it, but they are a bunch of bumbling fools ultimately. If you want to see the like more comic version of this, there is a series, like a limited series that's you can watch on Max called White House Plumbers. It's Woody Harrelson is Howard Hunt and Justin Theroux is Gordon Liddy, and he plays him like a friggin' wacko, which like I guess was true
He,
because the Deep
he
Throat tells that story about him like
holding
holding
that.
his hand over a candle and just being like, "Oh yeah, you like get used to it" or whatever while
Yeah.
his hand is burning.
His burning. Yeah. So, yeah, that was his test or whatever that, yeah, he just, he was, they said he was crazy. So,
Yeah. So if you want to see that version, I definitely also recommend checking out White House Plumbers. And you get also, because that's like from the perspective of the people doing it, you get to see like all the people involved
oh, okay.
in a different way because it's from like the
I have not
inside.
seen that. So, okay. That'd be
I feel like you
interesting.
might enjoy it. But yeah, you get like John Dean, like they're talking to John Dean, and John Dean is like, you did not speak to me. This did not happen. Which we hear a lot of in this movie too.
Exactly. I was
Um,
never here. You were never here. This conversation never took
yeah.
place.
Also, ultimately, and I think this comes up in this movie, the scheme seems rather useless because the problem was, I guess it went back. So they were trying to sabotage the Democrats even before the Democrats had a nominee because there were some that polled better than Nixon. But at the point that the movie takes place, like it's him versus McGovern, and like he's gonna beat McGovern, but they're still like doing it.
Right. To me, it's part of what played into the at the beginning of it is like, why would they even bother? This
Mm-hmm.
can't be anything other than just some doofuses, trying to break into the National Democratic headquarters for whatever
Mm-hmm.
reason. But it can't be anything serious because Nixon's winning hands down. I mean, he's leading all the polls.
Mm-hmm.
He's ahead in everything. He's the one, the man,
Incumbent.
the incumbent, the man that people want. At the time we were in the middle of Vietnam, he was going to be the president that got us out of Vietnam. That was going to be a
Mm-hmm.
big thing. So, negotiate the peace talks and so on. So, yeah,
Yeah, yeah. It also seemed like from watching White House Plumbers, a lot of those guys were really like still on the communist witch hunt thing. So they were really looking for any they still thought of like Democrats as like communists, so they were like they felt very righteous about it.
yeah. Well, supposedly that, Nixon was one of those people who, decided that, if you weren't with him, you were against him. And then,
Yeah.
he everything was, if you weren't supporting him, then he was going to try to find stuff about you. So,
Yeah, yeah. And eventually things I don't know all the details, but eventually things continue to devolve, right? As this is being investigated.
mhm.
He's trying to have like the attorney general do illegal things, and then that leads to the Saturday Night Massacre, where he just keeps, or White House counsel, he just keeps firing
Firing people.
lawyers until someone will agree to do the illegal thing he wants them to do, which does sound familiar.
Ring a bell,
um,
anybody? Oh, no.
yeah. Were there lots of people
Have
being
I heard
fired
that song
before?
before? they're
Like
they're playing our tune.
last week. Yeah, so it became, I think, Watergate became sort of synonymous with like political corruption,
Hmm.
presidential like overreach, all of this stuff.
Well, like I think it's still the, for better or for worse, it's the standard bearer,
Yeah.
for dirty deeds. It's like
Yes,
it's still the alpha male. So
of course. And the people now are like, hold my beer, because I think we can make it worse.
we shall
So
see.
indeed,
Uh,
indeed. Yeah, I will say it's my family is pretty historically. I was just telling Jim this before we started recording. You were watching the hearings. My mom always tells me the story that my great grandfather in Kentucky, so my family in Kentucky, lifelong Democrats. Like my grandmother grew up going to Democratic Party meetings in the 30s and 40s. So her father would, when my mom was a kid, whenever they would go visit, he's like locked in. Just him. Do not go in this room and bother him. Him in front of the TV watching the Watergate hearings because he like hated Nixon.
it was must see TV. I got to tell you, for if people think nowadays that if you watch CNN and stuff, I mean, this
Mm-hmm.
was on network TV. This was back in the
Yeah.
days when there were three networks, people, and then
Mm-hmm.
public television, and it was on all the networks. But it was like this. It wasn't dry. It was like, it was like you were really waiting to hear, what was going to come out of their mouths next,
Mm-hmm.
because they were asking some tough questions. And then, there you were waiting to see who was going to, finally come across with the truth, or at least answer the questions. So,
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. And it reminded me like of in more recent history when like Robert Mueller was testifying and there were impeachment hearings, and like my grandmother would be watching those 24/7 and like calling me and telling me her thoughts and how she's praying for Robert Mueller every day.
before we get into the movie, the one last personal thing I'll say is that also at this time, where I was a sophomore in high school and stuff, I was starting to think about what I wanted to do with my life. And then this actually led me to eventually think about and major in political science,
Mm,
and when I went to Marshall University. So, with the thoughts of becoming an attorney, not a politician, but I thought maybe I could do something, and I was encouraged by some people that, well, if you're going to change the system, try to change it within.
hmm
Fortunately, I never went down that path, so thank God, because I probably would have been a terrible attorney. So, anyway, that's enough about me and Watergate.
I appreciate though, like you had like To Kill a Mockingbird and this that influenced you. I was influenced by like ER and like
Yeah.
Silence of the Lambs.
And
to get into my. So it's good to meet another person that was influenced in their career path by movies and television.
movies, well, based on what our influences were and so on. So you grow up and then, that's where you sort of get the idea maybe there's, this is something I could do or something that I would
Right.
like, or there's, you know, a career path that is not apparent or maybe not as obvious to the people around me, at the time.
Mm-hmm.
So I grew,
Exactly.
yeah. So,
Exactly. It puts
yeah,
out some possibilities for
yeah,
sure.
exactly. So opens up your eyes a little bit.
Definitely. Well, shall we get into the movie?
Sure.
So it starts with to orient us to where we are in time. It's a typewriter typing, but it's like amplified, very loud. We're very zoomed in, and it says it's June 17th, 1972. And we get kind of like some juxtaposition, right? Like Nixon is has arrived to give his address to Congress, and then we see the Watergate complex, and there's like, it's nighttime, it's dark, but there's some flashlights in some area because again, these the guys doing the break-in, not the smartest people.
Not the sharpest knives in the drawer.
Yeah. And then a security guard in the building finds a door like taped, like the lock is taped so it would stay open. And he calls the police. There's a group of undercover, like plainclothes cops around. The first time I watched this movie, I was like, wait, are they the burglars? And I'm like, oh no, they're the cops. But they just like they're like the closest, so they have to go investigate. And the guys in there are like in like suits. The guys breaking in look nicer than the cops do. They're in suits. They're very casually just like looking through stuff. There's not really a sense of like urgency here.
No rhyme or reason about what they're doing either.
No,
It
like they're
looks
not
like,
looking for something. They're just perusing.
yeah, it's like they're window shopping.
Yeah, they're just like, "Huh, look at this. Let me open
Yeah.
this drawer." Like um they have like radios with them, like walkie-talkies. And one guy's like, "Oh, it's too loud. Like turn them off." And again they have their bright lights because there's another undercover cop like across the way, and he's like calling into his buddies like they're clearly like there are guys in there doing
Yeah.
something. I can see
Yeah.
them. Like
Yeah. I could
he
see
has
flashlights.
binoculars. You didn't wouldn't even need the binoculars. It was very obvious. No one is being subtle here. Then the undercover cops arrive, but of course they can't get away because they've turned their radios off, so they can't communicate to each other that the cops are there. So these five guys are all caught.
Hiding
Um,
under the desks, which I thought
yeah,
was like, really, you guys are thinking you're gonna outsmart, these police officers.
right. So then they all get arrested, and we meet Bob Woodward. Bob Woodward is someone you probably still see on TV. He's very much still actively writing this kind of stuff. He's written some books about Trump. And again, like Trump will just like tell him illegal shit he does. And it's like, do you know who this is? Have you seen this movie? Apparently not. But
He did
anyways,
a lengthy interview with him a
yeah.
while back, and then wrote a book about it. So
Yeah. And
yeah,
Trump was like, yeah, I mean, I knew that COVID was a thing, but like I wasn't trying to tell anybody about it. It's like, do you know he's writing a book about this? Anyways, Bob Woodward is played by Robert Redford, which is very generous to Bob Woodward, no offense. But if I were him, I would also sign off on that.
sure. We want Robert Redford to play you because he's producing the movie. You had me at Robert Redford, so
I'm good with that. I'm good with that.
exactly. Yep.
Robert Redford, we have met before on our podcast when we did The Sting. Also, again, he was in Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. He is in me and Jim's favorite Marvel movie, Captain America the Winter Soldier, which I think borrows a lot tonally from this movie. Because I think actually the directors were going for this sort of 70s political thriller vibe, which I do
I,
think
yep. I
is
would agree with
successful
that.
in that movie. So I think that's part of the reason why it's like good. Anyways, Bob Woodward is a reporter at the Washington Post. He's on the local desk, and their editor at the local desk, who is named Harry Rosenfeld. He's played by Jack Warden, who we have also met because he was in The Replacements. He was the old guy that owned the team. He was also in Heaven Can Wait, Shampoo, and Brian's Song. So Harry Rosenfeld says, "Hey, there was a break-in at the Watergate complex, so like go figure it out." Carl Bernstein, our other main character, you also still see him on CNN all the time. He's also still out here pounding pavement doing journalism. Although it's probably a lot easier. People probably are much more willing to talk to them than they were in this movie. Um, he is played by Dustin Hoffman. Again, generous. Dustin Hoffman, you know from a million movies: The Graduate, Kramer versus Kramer, Rain Man, Tootsie, Midnight Cowboy, Hook, Meet the Fockers, Little Big Man. He's the voice of, is he the little trainer guy in Kung Fu Panda?
Yeah.
He's
And
like the little guy that trains him.
Marathon Man.
Marathon Man, yes. Marathon Man, also written by William Goldman. So a lot of
Mm-hmm.
overlap
Yeah.
here.
Yeah.
So Bernstein's like, he wants to kind of get in on it too. And you can see it's interesting. They haven't started working together yet, but they do have a very different style where it feels like Woodward is a lot more meticulous, wants to like dot his I's and cross his T's, where Bernstein is like, he's got some theories and he's trying to kind of follow his like instincts on things a little bit more. Which, we see some kind of that pushing up against each other. But so Woodward's working on it. He goes to the courthouse because the five guys that were arrested are going to be arraigned. And he's sort of starting to ask some questions. And he's sitting behind a guy who's a lawyer. And he's like, "Oh, are you representing them?" And he's like, "I'm not here." I mean, obviously I'm here, but I'm not here.
I love that. Yeah, the interplay.
Yeah. So it turns out that the guys who did the break-in, three of them are Cuban, or four of them are Cuban. One of them is a guy named James McCord, who used to work for the CIA.
What a
And
surprise.
all right. And then the others also have some ties to the CIA. And then it also, they're found to have had like bugging equipment, so to like place like
Right.
recording devices. And then basically it turns out, so they didn't make any phone calls, so they got assigned attorneys, right? They were going to get the like public defender basically showed up ready to defend them, but they had some other fancy lawyer that was there. And it's like, but how did they get this fancy lawyer if they didn't make any phone calls?
They also had a substantial amount of money on each one of them in cash. I mean, for the
Yes.
time period, it was like anywhere from a few hundred to maybe $1,000.
Yeah. So they were trying to bug the DNC, obviously. Woodward, he keeps asking questions and he gets the name Howard Hunt. And then it says like W House. So it's like Howard
Or
Hunt at the White
White
House.
House. Yeah.
um, so he calls the White House, which apparently was the thing you could just do in 1972. You just call the White House and be like, "Hello, I would like to speak to this person." And the people, again, this is why people in the 70s were getting killed by serial killers. Everyone was just too open. They're like, "Oh yeah, he works for Mr. Colson. I'll connect you to Mr. Colson's office." Charles Colson was a special counsel in the Nixon White House.
Hmm.
Hunt is not in Colson's office either, but they also tell him that he works also at some like PR place. So he's trying to ask around. He eventually does get Hunt on the phone, and he has no comment. He's trying to continue to make calls. Again, the beauty, the like glamour of journalism at the time is you just call people and they don't answer, they don't tell you anything. He's not really getting anywhere. He eventually finds out that Hunt worked for the CIA, and he has not, he worked for the CIA up until like 2 years ago, and then he began working for Colson, and that the FBI suspects him of involvement in the Watergate break-in. Um, and then we get some sort of internal newspaper politics, I guess. So Harry Rosenfeld is like the local desk editor, and kind of the next editor up is Howard Simons. And he doesn't want Woodward on this story because Woodward is pretty new. He's been there less than a year.
Yeah, he's kind of like the rookie, and like, yeah, just sort of starting out.
Yeah, and now with all of this information, now there's a White House connection. This is not local news anymore. It's now
Right.
elevated to national news, so they want someone a little more less green on it. Meanwhile, Woodward is kind of typing up his piece with what he's found so far, and Bernstein has notes. And he just takes it and starts polishing it up. Woodward's like, "What are you doing?" He's like, "I'm polishing up your piece." He was like, I didn't ask you to do that." But Bernstein's just like, da 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 da. And then, to be fair, Woodward looks and he's like, "Okay, that is kind of better." Uh,
Yeah.
yeah.
And I here, I'm sorry to interrupt. We couldn't get Bernstein has been there evidently a little bit longer because he's talking about, he's been on the paper longer. He has, more experience and so on, and he's trying to punch up the story, I guess is how they phrase it, or that kind
Yeah.
of thing. He
Yeah, because he's like, some of this information, like you haven't mentioned Colson's name until like a later paragraph that needs to be brought forward. You need to like be more clear for the reader so they can like follow what you're saying, like da da da. And I think this is like a good sense of like their style, right? Because Bernstein can give it a little bit more flair, but Woodward is like, here are my notes. Like you have to do it with the facts from my
Right.
notes.
Yeah. He says, okay, I don't mind you doing it. I mind how you did it. That
Mm-hmm.
if you want to make it a better story, if you're going to do it right. Here's all my facts. Here's all my notes.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And then we're getting into talking to some sources. So Bernstein meets with this young lady, and you also get his vibe that he's a little flirtatious. He's a bit of a ladies' man.
Just ask Nora.
Exactly. Rest in peace to the goat Nora Ephron.
Exactly. So,
But
yeah,
she'll tell you, watch Heartburn, people.
which is another good movie, by the way.
I've never seen it, but
Oh, Jack Nicholson and Meryl Streep.
so, anyways, he meets with this young woman. She used to be like an assistant to an assistant in Colson's office. So, Colson, again, being the special counsel. And she says that Hunt did work for him and they were doing a lot of research on Ted Kennedy, who I guess they had thoughts might be running for president.
Yeah,
Um, so they're like, okay, because he kept going to the library and like pulling out books on him, especially Chappaquiddick. So they're trying to pull up dirt on people. If you don't know Chappaquiddick, there's also a movie about this, but he like Ted Kennedy like drove a car into a lake and there was a woman in it with him and he like left her there to die. I believe is
drown. Yeah,
is the story. So,
and didn't call the police or anybody till like 12 hours later.
aha. So yeah, he let this lady die. So that's I guess good oppo research on him. So Bernstein calls the White House Library to see what Hunt was researching. And I think this is where we start to get hints that like there's something going on because the librarian is like, "Oh yeah, like Mr. Hunt was here all the time. Let me just like get the list of his materials." Bernstein's like, "Great." And then she comes back and she's like, "I don't have anything for you. I actually have never seen Mr. Hunt in my life. I don't even like know who that is." And then he goes to tell Woodward, and Woodward's like, he wants to double check it. So he calls, is it Clausen in the communications office?
Mm-hmm. And yeah,
See, it's confusing. Colson, Clausen, these people
Clausen.
need they need more different names. But so Woodward always wants to, before they can like print anything, he always wants to allow for comment from the White House Communications Department. So he calls Clausen, the communications director, and talks about this. And Clausen's like, hold on a minute. And he goes and comes back and he's like, I just talked to that librarian. She says she never talked to Mr. Bernstein ever. So
Yeah,
it's like they're straight up lying. Like we're getting into gaslight territory. Like
exactly.
this
Yeah.
but like this literally happened. Like we just had this conversation. So, yeah, I think again, I wrote in my notes here like I think Woodward is looking for the facts and Bernstein is looking Woodward's trying to like just follow the facts and let them lead him somewhere and Bernstein is like constructing his understanding of like the underlying scheme and trying to kind of like fit the pieces into that, I
I
think.
It's a great analysis, I think. So, yeah, that
Yeah.
yeah.
So then they were like, well, they also heard from that girl, the girl Bernstein talked to, that they were all the Hunt and them were also going to the Library of Congress. So they go there. And at first they're told like it's confidential, whatever the White House gets from here. But then they seem to go to like maybe somewhere different in there, and that guy's like, "Oh yeah, I'll give you all the cards."
Oh, well, he goes, "Are you sure you want everything?" He goes, "Because it's
Yes.
like," and then we see.
We see, because at this point,
uh,
this is not an
uh,
electronic system. You have a
I,
card.
I was going to say, so Lindsay, you might want to tell our audience then, for those of us, for those of them who did not, know what how the libraries worked back in the 1970s. When you
Yeah, so
requested a book, you had to fill out a little card, and then
uh-huh.
they would pull the book and then put the card in the book and so on.
Mm-hmm.
But he's got what, hundreds
Yes. Just
easily
stacks. Stacks and stacks and
held
stacks.
together with like big rubber bands and
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
And they are just looking through all of them, but they
I
don't
know,
find anything,
I
which
know,
sucks.
and they're looking for yeah, like the the names and and stuff, and then my God, and then it what impressed me was all throughout this the nature of the research they had to do, in order
Mm-hmm.
to come up with this. And this was like I'd written down, this is what life was back in the 70s. No, rotary phones, notepads and pens, typewriters, and that was, that's how you did the work.
Mm-hmm.
You wrote on reams and reams of legal pads or notepads, and you and everybody had a big pen back then.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So
And
anyway,
just asking questions. That's like
yeah.
journalism where you're just like
And how
calling
long did
people and asking questions.
on the phone constantly,
Mm-hmm.
just like you could see them like from all day long. They're on the
Yeah.
phone.
And you can't Google a phone number, right? So you like have one person's phone number and you call them and you ask, or you're in the big old phone book, or like you see Woodward do too. He's calling someone. He's like, "Do you have the number for this person, or can you transfer me to this person?" Da,
Hmm.
da, da, da. Like, is
And
this
he's got
person
a
there?
Rolodex, and
Mm-hmm.
Lindsay can attest to this. I had Rolodex for years, of phone
Mm-hmm.
numbers and of people, that, even I kept that for years. So
Yeah.
from my
Yeah.
old days in the VA.
It's still useful, I think.
Yeah.
So they start to take their research and their work to the sort of big editor at the Post, which is Ben Bradley. He's played by Jason Robards, who won an Oscar for his work in this movie. Jason Robards, a pretty big star in his time. He was at one point married to Lauren Bacall.
He also did a lot of Broadway.
Some more recent movies, he was in Philadelphia, Enemy of the State, Magnolia. He won an Oscar right after this for the movie Julia. He was in Melvin and Howard, Once Upon a Time in the West. So lots of things. So, but yeah, Ben Bradley is like, he's intrigued, but he's like, you need better sources because they're getting a lot of like, the secretary of the secretary and a lot of like third hand information, and they don't have enough corroboration. So he's like, keep going on this, but you need better sources before we're going to put it in the paper. So Woodward turns to a source that he has talked to before. This is the man known as Deep Throat, because he was a secret informant. Eventually, years later, we learned that it was Mark Felt who worked for the FBI. He eventually rose to deputy director,
Mhm.
but at the time, he would not say who he was. So he Woodward calls him and he's like, "Don't call me.
Oh, I know. It was like, it's
What are you
like,
doing?" And like
um,
Woodward calls him from like a payphone, so it is like, I'm people weren't necessarily like dumping luds at the time, but he's like, "This is what we need to do. This is if you want to talk to me." And he doesn't want to talk about Watergate. He's like, "Do not ask me about Watergate. Stop."
right,
So he's like, "Okay, if we need to talk, this is what you have to do." And this is again like this is crazy. You have to like put a red flag in your flower pot on your balcony at your apartment, and then I will put a note in your newspaper, and then you can meet me. But like you also have to be careful that you're not being followed.
right.
So it's like, oh shit.
This is like cloak and dagger stuff.
Yeah,
So,
this is like serious,
uh-huh.
serious.
Um,
So then, well, then he goes to meet him, and he like takes a taxi to like the opera, and then he gets in a different taxi, and then they meet in a parking garage.
Like in get late at night,
Yeah, and like
and
Deep Throat's like standing in the shadows.
smoking.
Yes.
Bob
Um,
Woodward's the only one that does it well. I was going to say Carl Bernstein, his character, he smokes like a
yeah.
garbage fire.
Well, because there's a point where Woodward's like, "Is there anywhere where you won't
Won't
smoke?"
smoke. Yeah, because he does smoke everywhere.
So, Woodward's trying to ask Deep Throat some questions. So he brings up Gordon Liddy, who we learned was working for John Mitchell at the committee to reelect the president, which the acronym is CREEP.
And that's how it's
Which,
pronounced. That's how they
yeah, that's
say
what
it in
they
the
call it. They
movie.
call it CREEP.
Call it creep.
So it
The shoe fits.
tracks. Yeah. So Gordon Liddy is this guy who was working for John Mitchell. So John Mitchell had been the attorney general. He left to run the campaign. Although we later learned he was doing some of this illegal stuff even while he was still the attorney general. So Gordon Liddy's working for John Mitchell. He used to work for the CIA, but Mitchell fired him because he wouldn't talk to the FBI. And we learn a little more about Liddy. Basically, he's crazy. Deep Throat talks about him being at a party and just like holding his hand over a lit candle for like a sustained period of time and just like not flinching at all. And he's like, someone asked him about it, I guess. And I think the answer was like, you just have to like get used to it or something.
Yeah, just it was like, oh, it's just if you don't mind,
Yeah.
and he was on the radio. I remember that he had his own radio show for a while, syndicated radio. Gordon Liddy.
Yeah. He in White House Plumbers, he was like always playing music.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, that was whenever
Okay.
people would come over, he was like, "Oh, listen to this." And he would like put on a new record and he was like very into specific. He was like into like I think on White House Plumbers, he was into like borderline like Nazi shit. And Howard Hunt was like, what?" And he's like, "Isn't this great?" And it would be like the German like Volksband from 1939. Like,
Perfect. Perfect.
we should have like brushed up on that show. But again, if you're at all interested in Watergate, I think that's a good show to check out. Basically, Deep Throat says these guys are not super smart, and all of this actually got way out of hand versus like what was supposed to be happening.
Yeah.
And he says a line that's infamous that actually like is not real. This was invented for the movie. But I think it's one that we've heard in a lot of movies since then. It's like sort of a pop culture thing. But Jim, what is it?
Follow the money.
Exactly, exactly. And again, Woodward tries to ask more questions, but Deep Throat basically is like, I'm not going to give you information, but if you ask me questions, I will like confirm, and I'll
Yeah,
try to keep you in on the right path. But like, I'm not going to give you any information.
that's what I wrote. He's not going to he's not going to tell him anything, but he'll confirm the information. If
Yeah,
Woodward says something, he'll either say, yeah, you're right, or no, you're wrong. Or
yeah. He just wants to keep him in the right path without like implicating himself too much. And then they kind of get scooped. The New York Times publishes an article about some phone calls between some people in Florida and the Watergate burglars, as well as some exchange of money. And it's being investigated by the DA in Miami. So down to Miami, Bernstein goes. And they clearly do not want to talk to him because they keep him in that waiting room all day the first day.
But by the way, did you? And I don't remember the actress's name, but the woman who played the secretary was Flo on the TV show in the '70s about the Alice's Restaurant, I think is what it was. But but she was excellent. Yeah, she did a good job of putting him off and then having him park his keister outside the office
Oh
for
yes,
the
Polly
whole
Polly Holiday.
Holly Holiday. Couldn't think of her name, so that's a name you can't make up now. Come on now.
Nope. And
Uh,
apparently it was her real name. Is her real name? She's still alive.
and her boss was played by what's in Deliverance, and I can't think of his
Ned
name.
Beatty.
Ned Beatty.
Yes. Also he's in a lot of things.
Oh gosh,
Yeah. Back to School, Rudy, Network, Superman.
Hmm.
He was also on Homicide: Life on the Street. He's one of those people, if you see his face, I think you
Great
can
character
recognize him.
actor.
Hmm. So eventually, though, his name's Dardis, the DA there in Miami. And he shows Bernstein some records about this Barker guy who I think was one of the burglars,
Uh-huh.
and all these checks for like $25,000.
Out of Mexico.
Yeah, from a bank in Mexico. And then they see some checks with the name Kenneth H. Dahlberg. So Woodward and Bernstein are trying to figure out who that is and how to reach him. They can't find him. And then finally, one of the people at the paper is like, oh, I couldn't find like him in any articles or whatever, but like, here's this picture. And there was a picture from a newspaper of like, I think it was a former president giving an award. It was like
Y-
Kenneth Dahlberg of like Minnesota or something.
right. Yeah.
So then Woodward pulls out, I guess they have the phone books of every state.
It's the
So he,
Washington Post. Hey,
of
come
course,
on.
of course.
No,
So
no, no expense spared here. So,
yeah, he pulls out the Minnesota phone book and finds him. And he calls him and is like, he sounds crazy at first because he's like, I gave all my money to the committee. My neighbor's wife was kidnapped. And he like hangs up on Woodward.
yeah, that was an odd conversation.
Yes. And then Woodward calls the committee. He calls Creep. And he's asking some questions, and they are not happy to hear from him.
No.
What are you talking about? Jesus. I think at one point they say, like, Jesus Christ. And he writes that in his notes.
Well, I like how they lead off to every time they somebody answers the phone and go, "This is Bob Woodward of the Washington Post, and I want to ask some questions about this Watergate thing."
Yeah.
And you'd think most people would just go click, but
Right. Just
because
hang up.
but no, it's like, what do you want to know? It's like,
Yeah.
or I
And
can't
then he
talk to
starts
you.
asking questions, and they go, gee, oh, God. And then they keep talking. This is why
I,
I'm like, these are the dumbest people.
exactly. I think this is before people got to the point where they just, like, oh, if someone calls you on the phone, you're supposed to be polite and you're supposed to answer the phone, and you're supposed
Right.
to tell them what they ask you and what they need to know.
Right.
Yeah, but I was
I
like,
don't answer my phone now.
I mean, even when they knock on the door like late at night and talk to these people, it's like, hey, I'm Carl Bernstein and I'm Bob Woodward from
They're
the
calling
Wash.
people at like 11:30.
I
I would be like,
know,
have you no
dude.
manners?
Well, every time they show up at somebody's house, it's dark. It's like,
Yeah.
it's like, and this, I don't. This supposedly took place like in the late summer, and like, like, so if it's
Mm,
dark, it's like 9, 10
it's
o'clock.
late. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like, dude,
It's not 7.
yeah, it's not like dinner time. So,
So, but Dahlberg calls back. He's like, I'm sorry that I was so weird. I was freaked out. And he says that he gave all the money to Mr. Stans, who is Nixon's head of finance, which is like kind of it connects it directly to Nixon
Nixon,
and his
yeah,
campaign. So it's
this
like,
just
oh
gets better and
snap.
better. Yeah, and you can see like Woodward's face, like,
Yeah.
what, what?
Stans. Again, the names, there's a lot to keep up with.
Hmm.
Stans is the director of
you,
finance.
you need a program.
You
You need
do,
a,
you
yeah,
do. I need like an org chart of
yes,
all of these people,
or something.
of
Yeah.
this criminal conspiracy. Who's in charge of who? So we also get to see an editorial meeting. They also call it a budget meeting because it's like they're budgeting the space in the newspaper. Again, there's still some pushback about like Woodward and Bernstein being on the story with them being relatively new. Also, some people are still skeptical of the story because, as we talked about, like if Nixon is leading in all the polls, why would the Republicans be doing this?
Right. Why would they even bother? And then
Yeah.
I had to give credit to Jack Warden's character because he did push to keep them on the story. He
Mm-hmm.
said that, hey, they're hungry. They're
Yes.
willing to do the work, and
Right. You see all those cards in the library they went through for nothing?
you see all the cigarettes that he smoked. I mean,
I know.
yeah. I'm surprised he's still kicking these days.
Exactly.
You know.
Um, truly. But yeah, and I think also the answer to why the Republicans would do that is because they're like paranoid and stupid. Not hashtag not all Republicans, but the ones in this
I was
particular story
yeah, yeah.
are
We're not saying you're
Richard
right.
Nixon. Paranoid and the people he hired, stupid. Bad combination, paranoid and stupid.
Bad combo. Yep.
Yeah. Bradley, again, he's kind of fine with them continuing, but he's like, you need to get more sources, right? You can't have like secret people, all these people who won't go on the record, like nothing corroborated. So, another one of the reporters there, she dated a guy who worked for Creep.
I don't know that I'd want that on my resume.
No, I would. I would spell it out
What
every
was your
time. Just
yeah?
spell it out.
What was your last job? Well, I worked for Creep.
Excuse
Okay.
me. So, and again, I think this gives us a glimpse into the differing styles of Woodward and Bernstein because
Mm.
they're like, "Hey, can you get some info from this guy?" And she's like, "Well, we broke up. I don't want to talk to him anymore." And Woodward's like, "Okay, that's fine. We don't want you to do anything you're uncomfortable with." And
And you can
Bernstein's
see
like,
her getting upset.
"Yeah," she like tears up
Hmm.
because Bernstein is kind of pushing her.
Right.
And
Well, just have a drink with him. Just
yeah, you don't have to like get back because I think that like she had been engaged to this guy and they broke up,
right.
so it was like obviously pretty substantial. Bernstein's like, just like go talk to him. You know, he doesn't have to come to your house. Like just like meet up with him. And the woman is like upset, and Woodward's like, okay, well we don't want you to do anything you're uncomfortable with. And Bernstein's like, oh yeah, we
Yeah.
do.
Yeah. He like pulls him away, and he goes, "What are you doing?" He goes, we almost had her, you know." And it's like, no, no, no.
Right.
That's not how we do
He's mad that
things.
she like he like let her off the hook basically.
Right. Exactly.
So they get a list of people who I think they work for Creep.
She that's her that
Yeah.
drops it on his typewriter in an
Yes.
envelope, and then she doesn't say a word, he doesn't say a
Hmm.
word. But yeah,
Yeah.
I thought,
She comes through
however,
again later too.
yeah,
So good
yeah.
for her.
Um,
But yeah, she gives them the list of people that work for Creep, and they're going door to door.
and Jesus, how many people work for this committee? I was looking at that. There was like pages.
There's a
It's
lot
like,
of people,
my
and it's like
God,
they're in columns too, so it's not
columns,
just like
and they're in alphabetical order. It's like,
yes, and they go
holy
through
shit.
like every one. They are going to these people's homes again at night. Going to
That
you
or
can't be going
calling
to
them, or
right.
they're yeah, trying to find their phone numbers and calling them, but it's like, holy crap.
Yeah,
You talk
and
about
basically
legwork.
right, literally. These people do not want to talk to them. They are
Dude.
scared, obviously. The vibe is that they're scared.
Yeah. Or they've been told you don't talk to
You don't
the
talk
and
to them. Yeah.
yeah.
The funniest part is like one lady is like invites them in and starts talking to them, but it's the wrong person. She has a different first name, and it's like the wrong. They had the right last name, but the wrong first name.
But she talks about, like, she goes, I'm a Republican, but this goes way beyond, and
Yeah.
and they're like, oh God, we hit the gold mine,
Yes. And
and
then they're
then
like,
they
so you're they like ask her a question about something specific, and she's like, what?
well,
And
they
they're
said,
like,
are you work for so and so at the committee to reelect? She says, I didn't work for them. She goes,
yeah.
she was a sales lady or something, and she
Mm.
at some store.
And they're like, "Oh, are you like Betty Johnson?" And she's like, "Oh no, I'm like Carol Johnson." And then they're like, "Oh, damn."
Damn, I know. It's like, because she invites them in for coffee, and they've got the fancy coffee cups, and they think that hell's bells, that we're in now,
Oh
brother.
yeah.
And then it's like shit.
Yeah. So, their reporting has actually moved the needle a little bit. It has
Hmm.
prompted the GAO, which is the General Accounting Office. This is, I guess, before, I guess we didn't have the FEC then. We didn't have like the Federal Election Commission. So like
No,
this,
well, like you said earlier, this is what started all that. It's
yeah.
like, yeah, this is why we have the Federal Election Commission.
Yeah.
So,
So the General
and
Accounting Office, I guess, was the only kind of like financial sort of
hmm
watchdog.
oh
So
yeah,
it prompted them to investigate creep. And so they're kind of counting on this report to like sort of open up some new doors, guide their next steps, whatever. And then what a surprise, it gets delayed until after Nixon is renominated, obviously with the goal of like burying it.
right, yeah, that yeah, after the Republican National Convention. So
Yeah. Bernstein continues to try to flirt with women to get information, and he goes to this woman who was the bookkeeper for Sloan and Stans. So Stans again is the finance guy, and Sloan like worked for him.
him,
Um, and so this lady is, I think she's also just credited as like the
the
bookkeeper.
bookkeeper, yeah,
And
exactly.
she does not want to talk to him. Her sister lets him in. She didn't even let him in, and she's kind of to her sister like, "Well, why did you let him in here?"
Well, he was like oh, she goes, oh, you want my sister, and she goes, I'm not talking to you, and then he goes, oh, can I get a cigarette? It's like,
Yeah. Oh,
and we're
I need a match.
I
And so
need a
he just like
match.
insinuates himself. He invites
Exactly.
himself in and makes himself comfortable.
And then,
But
can I have some coffee?
mhm.
Son of
And
a bitch drinks
eventually,
coffee like there's no tomorrow, by
that's
the
the
way.
thing. He when he busts into Woodward, he's like, "What the fuck is wrong with you?" He's like, "I drank a million coffees. I had so many coffees." He's like the Tasmanian devil.
I
Like,
know, yeah.
"Ugh." But whatever, it works because he just sits there and is like, he kind of. It seems like he just kind of wears this woman down, and she eventually just starts.
He said he spent 6 hours with her.
Yeah,
It's like, and he was there like at nighttime. It was like,
right. That's why he had to drink all that coffee. But she does give some information, kind of a lot of, for someone who wasn't going to say anything, she does give
I
quite a bit
know.
of information.
Well, she talks about, like, he asked about how much money was in there, and she said, well, what over a 2 day period, $6 million arrived in
Hmm.
cash. She didn't
Yeah,
know where to
because
put it.
they thought he was saying something about $350,000, and she's like, "Oh no, 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 it was much more than that."
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, please. Yeah. It was like, yeah, in cash. I mean, and
Yeah.
you're talking 1970s money.
Uh-huh.
We're probably talking, that'd be close to like $50 million these days.
Yeah.
Just saying.
And she also does insinuate to him that John Mitchell was kind of in charge of this whole operation, even again before he left his spot as the attorney general, which is like just like blatantly corrupt and evil.
What was she only uses initials? Remember, she
Yes, yes, yes.
and she won't confirm or say who it was. So,
Yeah, but then they kind of trick her into confirming some names. So they're like, "Here's what we're gonna do. One of them has a P, so we think that's Porter, right? So we're just gonna go and be like, so we know that this is Porter based on like what we reviewed,
and
and
L
then
is Liddy,
yeah,
and then they're gonna make her say M is Mitchell, or try to
yes,
get her to.
yeah, because obviously you can tell, like they just pretend they already know it. This is what cops do too. They pretend they already know information so that people will be like, "Well, yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
you know."
Or how did you know that?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
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 exactly. So
yeah.
they get all the names. And then their next stop is to Sloan. And Sloan left working for Mitchell because, or working for Stans
Mhm.
because his wife is pregnant and made him. And when they go to the house, the wife says, "This is a moral household."
And his wife is played by
Oh, I don't know. Oh, Meredith Baxter
Meredith Baxter. Yeah, who
from Family Ties.
Family Ties. Alex P. Keaton's mom,
Yes,
and
yes.
he's Steve Collins, Sloane.
Yes. Stephen Collins, who I know from Seventh Heaven and also being a child molester.
Wasn't going to go to the child molesting thing, but hey, that's fine. In all
I mean,
fairness,
that's a,
we have to be transparent. So,
yes. That's
so
what I know him from, right? I
well,
grew up
that's
watching
okay.
Seventh Heaven, and then years later, his career ended because he was apparently molesting young girls.
Yeah.
So
So, well, um,
it's just how I know him. He was also on No Ordinary Family.
he was in a bunch of
He was in
stuff.
He's in Star Trek, the
Yeah. Yeah.
1979 Star Trek movie. So
Yeah.
plenty of things. But yeah, so he's not doing anything now. Because anyways, he
Anyways,
plays Sloan. They are visiting him, and he basically says there's a whole fund with disbursements, a whole fund for like all of these activities, all this like shady stuff. The disbursements are approved by John Mitchell. And again, this started while he directly confirms that this happened while he was still the attorney general.
right.
He says Colson is involved too. Colson is the White House counsel, I believe, but he won't give all the names. And he, again, also confirms that there was like a lot of money.
I thought it
But
was pretty funny when they asked him, well, how did that work with the handing out the money? He said, not very well. And it was like, because he said, and then he said, well, no, what was the process? It's,
well, again, this is like a collection of goobers.
evidently. So
Yeah.
Sloan also seems like maybe one of the few intelligent people that might have been,
Right. Keeping it,
involved.
he was keeping them on track. And now,
But he said he had to call Mitchell to
mhm,
get the authority to disperse funds.
yeah.
So, and
Yeah. So, and you know what? He had the moral fiber to duck out before continuing to do more illegal stuff. He's like, I can't be a father and do illegal shit. Well, actually, his wife was like,
Right. I think
his
that
wife
maybe
made him,
I was going to say, I
but
think maybe it was more the fact that he was more afraid of his wife, which he should be, by the way, just
yes,
saying,
yeah.
about her feelings towards him as opposed to, his standing in the Republican
Mhm.
Party. So,
Yes. I also loved in this scene where he's like, listen, I'm a Republican. And Woodward says, I am too. And Bernstein looks at him like,
yeah,
like a
it's like,
betrayal.
I know, like he said, like I'm a Nazi.
Yeah. Bernstein was like, oh,
I know, it's like,
how dare you?
well, because at first I thought maybe he thought, well, Woodward's not a Republican. I don't know if he is or
Right.
not, but or that he thought, wait a minute, you're a Republican, and I'm working on this story with you. What the hell's wrong with you?
Right, right.
But anyway,
Ben Bradley's still annoyed that no one's going to go on the record, but
oh, and yeah, annoyed is putting it lightly because
yeah,
yeah,
he's
yeah,
pretty pissed.
yeah, he's pretty pissed.
But Bernstein calls Mitchell at 11:30 p.m. to, get comment on the story. And he like kind of denies it. There's a lot of non-denial denials
Yeah,
here. He mostly just insults Catherine Graham, who like owned the paper at the time. He was like,
and and
Katie Graham's gonna get her tits caught in a vice or something.
in a ringer,
In a ringer, which Bernstein relays verbatim to Ben Bradley. And Ben Bradley's like, "Oh, he really said that about Mrs. Graham?" And he was like, "Yeah." And he's like, "Okay, well, run it."
But he said, take out the part where he said tit.
Yeah.
And he goes, why? He goes, it's a family newspaper.
Yes.
I
Yes.
love that. As the performance, I have to say at this point, Jason Robards well deserved the Academy Award for this.
Yes. It's funny too, because it always, whenever we see him like in these late 19th, it's like he just got back from some like gala because he's in like a tux and like these fancy loafers and stuff. But he's like leaned back with his feet up on a desk,
Mhm.
smoking and reading.
I also noticed that like 90% of the guys that wear ties in this movie never pull them all the way up and button their
Mhm.
shirt. They're always
Yeah.
undone, and it's like,
Because they're running around town getting information.
that's right, baby. They're working hard for the money. So just
Yes.
saying. So trying to save our
So
democracy.
we get some more non-denial denials. We get to see famous Marylander Spiro Agnew,
Mhm.
who was the vice president for Nixon at the time and also did crimes. I don't know if they were just related to this or if he also did separate crimes.
It was separate. It was some separate because this was also during the time when he stepped down too. So
Yeah. So, woohoo. Shout out
great,
to Maryland.
great, great job, fellas.
Uh,
Just
way to
way to instill confidence in the American people.
right. And way to Oh yeah, he was investigated by the United States District Attorney for the District of Maryland on suspicion of criminal conspiracy, bribery, extortion, and tax fraud. He took kickbacks from contractors during his time as Baltimore County Executive and Governor of Maryland. These payments continued into his time as Vice President, but had nothing to do with Watergate, in which he was not implicated.
Well,
So
that's nice to know.
he was he didn't
He
do Watergate because he was too busy with his other crimes.
taking graft.
Yes.
Yeah,
Ooh,
it's nice.
what a stand-up guy.
Well, at least I didn't have anything to do with that Watergate thing.
To be clear, I was doing other crimes.
Right. Yes, I was taking bribes. However, not,
Don't bring, I'm not in this.
I'm not with creep. Just saying,
Yes.
not with
Also
creep.
to be clear, it's a clip actually of Spiro Agnew talking about
Yeah,
these.
yeah.
Because
There's
he's
clips of
basically
the
saying,
actual people in the
yeah, like interspersed. So this is an
yeah,
actual clip of Spiro Agnew. And they're basically saying, like, this is all hearsay, like, this is all made up, blah, blah, blah.
which a
But
lot of them did say back then.
yes. But Bernstein meets with an FBI contact and they're like, how do you know all this stuff? Because, like, it's as if you are reading our reports,
No, except we didn't
except we
have.
didn't have Mitchell. So now we got to go look back at that.
I love that because he almost accuses him of like, do you have a mole in the FBI? Because
Yeah.
yeah, it's like you're staring over our shoulder.
Right. You're reporting is like what our reports say, basically.
Exactly. It's like, yeah, it's like you guys are on the same wavelength we are.
Yeah, exactly. So that's validating. Bernstein then gets a tip, and they start to kind of understand like the scale of this operation, that it was an entire scheme to sabotage Democratic candidates. I believe the term that some people use is rat fucking.
You weren't going to bring it up. I was because I wrote it down.
Yes. So they find some payments to this guy Segretti, for example.
And I
And
remember Segretti's name from the hearings.
yeah, that's an easy one to remember. He doesn't blend with all the others, Colson and Clausen and Sloan and Stans and all that. So
Heidelberg and Hemmerich and sorry,
Handelman.
Handelman. Yeah, that's it. Yeah.
So Bernstein goes to visit him in California, which, like, what is the budget at the Post for having Bernstein
Big,
fly all over the country?
well, you got to remember too, airline flights were cheap back then.
That's
Come on,
true.
but yeah, hey, it's the
This man is
Post.
crisscrossing the country.
It's the Post,
Yeah. Um, but and Segretti kind of confirms all this stuff that they were doing to sabotage people, but he won't go on the record.
Right.
Like they one of the guys, one of the Democratic candidates, they like wrote a fake letter that
Oh,
got him
accused somebody of fathering an illegal child, and then
yeah.
some other stuff. Well, they were after Muskie.
Muskie, that was the guy. They got him
Muskie.
out
They were
because
after Muskie
yeah,
because
during the Democratic primary, he was in polling, he was running ahead of Nixon.
correct.
They wanted to get to McGovern, which is what they got to.
Right. Right. So they got Muskie out because yeah, there was some other things, and yeah, and he laughed about it, Segretti, when
Mm-hmm.
Bernstein, because he said, "Oh, that's what we used to do in college during school politics, college, and that's where
Mm-hmm.
the term rat fucking came up." So
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
yeah,
Meanwhile, Woodward meets again with Deep Throat, and he's still very vague. But this time it's getting a little paranoid because a car like peels off. That was
and
also in the
in the parking
parking
garage,
garage, yeah.
and he's he's he's
Then
like
Deep Throat's like gone
gone. Yeah, he's like
in a puff of smoke,
he's like
in a puff of his own cigarette smoke.
Woodward's like looking around like, what the fuck? Sorry,
Hmm.
sorry, fellas. This is not a PG
We
rated.
just said rat fucking, so.
Yeah, well, that's true. So,
But and then like you can see like it's starting to get to Woodward because he's like sort of walking home alone at
I
night, and then
know
he's
it's
like he like starts walking faster, and then it's kind of like picks up to a jog, and the music is like
what,
it's like
and I wrote down. I thought, makes you wonder,
right.
why they wouldn't be a little more careful about what they did and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and then it's
Yeah.
serious.
Yes.
Well, more
Um,
serious.
our next Deep Throat meeting is worse, but before that, shout out to the ladies at the Washington Post.
Post.
So they're called Sally. She's connected because she had drinks with Ken Clausen, who's the White House communications director, and he says that he wrote the letter that messed up the Muskie campaign.
Right.
And so they call him for comment, and he denies like even really like meeting up. He was like, "Oh, I saw her at like a like a bar somewhere,"
Yeah.
but like he was at her house for drinks.
Mhm.
But he also has a wife.
And a
So
dog and a cat.
and a dog and a
Remember,
cat. I have a wife and a dog and a cat. And then, but as soon as Woodward and Bernstein hang up with him, he calls Sally. And so Woodward and Bernstein listen,
well,
covering the
good for Sally. Sally goes, he's on the phone. He's on the
yes.
phone.
So Woodward and Bernstein pick up also receivers, get on the same line and cover the mouthpiece. And he's like, "Why would you tell them?" He's yelling at Sally because obviously it's true. But he's like, "Why would you tell them that?" Da, 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 da.
And she's like, oh, well, I don't see anything wrong with that. We were just
Yeah,
having
we
drinks,
just had a drink. We didn't do
Yeah,
anything.
but I was at your house and I'm married and I have a wife and a cat and a dog.
So they're kind of getting a clearer picture of who's involved, right?
Then he makes another phone call though, remember, then to Bradley
Oh, yes.
and chews Bradley out. And Bradley's like, he's looking at Woodward and Bernstein like while he's talking to him. Carl, how's it going, buddy? What's new and exciting? What have you been up to? And it's like, damn it, you tell them guys to leave me alone, and I can't have that in the paper that I was at her place having drinks and shit like that. And
Hmm.
and he goes, oh, and he goes, and once again, I have a wife and a cat and a dog, and Bradley's like, and then you sort of get the idea that Bradley then gets reinforced that hey, these guys are on the track. That at
Hmm.
least that was my take on it. I didn't mean to
Yeah,
interrupt
yeah,
your
yeah.
flow. So, but
No, for sure.
I thought it was
I've
funny because he called Sally, then he called Bradley, trying to cover his ass.
hmm
You
hmm
know, as
This is
guys
back
do.
when the Washington Post didn't cower to people. If
Ooh,
they called
ooh.
Well, I'm just saying they like did you see that Jeff Bezos is like now our opinion section is only about like the free market or something? If
Yes.
like if someone wrote in the Washington Post wrote something that Donald Trump didn't like and he called Jeff Bezos would pull it.
Yep. Yep. I know. I know.
That
Uh,
the
uh,
Washington Post of the 70s is not the Washington Post of today.
well,
I'm just saying.
there's no Bill Bradley.
There's
So
no Ben Bradley, there's no
Ben Brad,
Catherine
Brad
Graham.
right.
Jeff Bezos is no Catherine Graham.
Things. No.
So they're kind of narrowing down. So they know that five people control the fund. They think the fifth person is this Halderman guy, but they don't have
Mhm.
proof. Sloan confirms it, and they kind of are saying that he said it in his grand jury
Right.
testimony, which is
Hmm.
not actually true. The FBI kind of won't confirm directly, and Bradley wants another source on this before they publish it. So
Right.
Bernstein calls someone that he knows is the Department of Justice, and the guy will not answer his question directly. So Bernstein says, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to count to 10 and then I'm going to hang up. If I'm wrong, stop me before I get to 10. But if I get to 10, then it means I'm right. He counts to 10. The guy doesn't stop him. And he goes and he's like, I got it. The Department of Justice confirmed, which again, this is like the most like light indirect confirmation ever. But
Yeah, it's a source close to the Justice Department.
yeah.
Yeah.
But so they run it. But then Sloan denies it, denies having talked about this. Because again, they say in the article that Sloan said this in his grand jury testimony, which they kind of had made up to get the other people that they were
Uh,
trying to get information from to confirm. They're like, well,
right.
we already know Sloan said this in his grand jury testimony, da da da. But it actually wasn't true. And we later learned that like Sloan says, no, you guys were right, but I wasn't lying that I didn't say it in my grand jury testimony because no one asked. So
Exactly.
I had never said it because no one asked me about it. But you
Which
were
in a
correct.
which in a way, if you think about it, if you know it and you're not forthcoming with it, but I guess he was
Mhm.
advised by his lawyer, you only answer the question.
Yes, yes.
And if they
So,
don't ask you, you don't come forward with it.
mhm. But yeah, at the moment of publication, Sloan denies it. So then that gives the White House the opening to attack them. So the press secretary is attacking them, like Clausen is attacking them on TV.
Mitchell is going after
Yes.
him.
All these people, like publicly, like they're again real clips on TV of these people attacking them. And Bradley is pissed because he has like
He
stood up for them,
hmm
but he kind of does decide to stand by them ultimately because he knows that like they're not wrong overall.
right. He just and I'm sure he probably realizes that at this point, there is deniable credibility.
Hmm.
The White House can, they're trying to fight back with what they have.
Yeah. And again, it's still like they're not like denying the information as much. It's still non-denial denials. They're not
Yeah,
denying that like the information is correct. They're denying like that piece. Like Sloan did not say this in his grand jury testimony.
right.
So they're like latching onto that as
To
something like, oh,
it,
this is not factual. So
the
dot dot
rest of it
dot.
must not be right.
Right. But
Yeah.
they won't directly say that because they know that it is correct. Woodward meets again with Deep Throat, and here's where things get really hairy. Deep Throat is like, you let Haldeman get away.
Yeah, he's like, you dumbass,
And you
it's
set the investigation back because they published something that was incorrect. So this is interesting. William Goldman actually decided because the just stepping out of the story for a moment, like
sure.
their book, All the President's Men, covers like all the way through, farther
Right.
through, like into the investigation and
Into
hearings
the
and
74 and 75 and
resignation.
yeah.
The movie ends around here because I think William Goldman, you can't write a movie with all of that, first of all, but he thought that like starting with the Watergate break-in and ending with their mistake was like an interesting like
Yeah.
actual story arc.
Right.
But yeah, so just so you know, they this like kind of mistake, quote unquote mistake. It was a small mistake in the grand scheme of like their information, but still something that did kind of set them back a little bit. But Woodward also at this point is tired of Deep Throat. He's like, no, 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 no. Stop giving me all this vague nonsense.
Bullshit. Right.
Like, Deep Throat does admit that it was like Haldeman operation. Mitchell was doing covert stuff before anyone knew, and it involves all of the intelligence community, federal law enforcement. So we're talking like CIA, FBI, Department of Justice, like all of these people are involved. And he also says that your lives are in danger.
Right.
So Woodward goes to see Bernstein and he turns on some classical music really loudly, which is funny because I just thought of this. In Captain America the Winter Soldier, when Nick Fury goes to Captain America's apartment and he immediately turns on loud music, it's like this, it's a parallel to this scene. Except in this scene,
I
in
hadn't
this
thought about,
movie,
yeah.
they Woodward types, they communicate by typing on a typewriter, but in
Hmm.
that he Fury types on his phone
Right.
to show him. So I just thought of that. I was like, wait, that's what happened in that scene. So they pulled the scene like directly from this movie. Anyways, so Woodward goes, he types on the typewriter to tell Bernstein, like, we were right about Haldeman, like, Mitchell was involved, like, law enforcement, whatever. Like, we're in danger, like, surveillance,
Yeah.
people following us,
Yeah. We're being bugged. We're being,
being
yeah.
bugged and followed, basically. Um, and Bernstein says he confirmed with, again, he says the thing I just said. Sloan confirmed they were right about Haldeman, but he didn't bring it up at the grand jury because he wasn't asked. So then they, again, it's like late as hell. They go to Bradley's house. They make him come outside to talk because they're like,
Hmm.
everybody's bugged. But they tell him all of this too. So then they kind of finally get to put together like this big story of like, this is this huge conspiracy of what's been happening. And there's a juxtaposition, like they're typing it up as Nixon takes his second oath of office because
Oh,
he
and
has won the election.
going back a little bit when they're
Mm-hmm.
meeting with Bradley too, the other part I like about this, where Bradley tells him, he goes, all right, and he says, okay, I believe you, but if you fuck this up this time, he goes, I'm going to get mad at you. And it's like, because you could tell he was upset about the big setback when Sloan
Mm,
denied everything and stuff, but now he's saying, okay, fellas, go, you know,
yeah,
write your story.
right. Because I think, like I said, like I think he knew that they were correct, but like having
Yeah.
that denial makes harms the paper's credibility.
Oh, sure.
So,
Yeah. Yeah. It puts him in a bad spot, and,
right,
and, and, and the owner,
Mrs. Graham.
you know,
So, but yeah,
it,
so the
then they're
movie kind of
typing.
ends. They're typing, and then we learn kind of the next steps in the scandal via like typed headlines. So
Yeah. The,
basically, it's
the,
like,
the teletype machine, like
yeah,
Nixon resigns,
yes, and
uh,
like Ford is sworn in, and all
people are
these other,
sentenced to prison and
yes,
and all this, and then da 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 da, and then yeah, I thought that was interesting. While they were typing, you see the actual swearing in ceremony of President Nixon,
mm-hmm,
for his second term, which January, I guess it was January of 73,
mm-hmm,
no, January of 74, and then he resigned. No, 73, and then he
yeah,
resigned. Yeah, resigned, and then they had the Watergate hearings and stuff. So
yeah,
because a lot of the stuff after the summer of 73, then that's when the investigation wrapped up and then crap like that. So I did read, you were talking about the Washington Post wasn't crazy about the story. Didn't read. I watched the movie on Turner Classic Movies.
mm-hmm,
And then there was a afterwards from Ben Mankiewicz, who does, some of the And he said the Washington Post wouldn't let them film inside the building unless it was between 3 and 6 a.m.
Uh,
And instead of doing that, they built a replica of the newsroom for like $450,000. So that what you're seeing when all those people are in there, that's a replica of the newsroom in
mm,
Washington, at the Washington. However, the Post did give them like trash cans and stuff like
hmm
out of the actual office building that they
Yeah.
weren't using to sort of make it authentic.
And
So,
they let William Goldman like come hang around and like observe their
oh,
meetings and
did they?
stuff.
Okay, that
Yeah,
had okay.
because
Oh, okay.
he observed a meeting and they said that Harry Rosenfeld, who was like the local desk, he's the guy that was
Mm-hmm.
right above them, like he would just like crack jokes like the whole time. And so
Oh,
he
really?
included a lot of that in the script and then they were kind of mad because they were like, you make us look like a bunch of clowns. But so it was like that kind of stuff. I think they didn't like the comic angle, but like it to some
I
extent it is funny.
I
Like
kind of liked it because I thought, because if you on the face of it, it's a, particularly when you think this is true life, this is real, this is
mhm.
real, this isn't something that a script that somebody wrote and made up.
Yeah.
This really happened, and
Yes.
yeah, it's a lot to take in.
So this is I'm looking at the like from the White House plumbers, the background on some of these people. So the White House plumbers start so in 71, Howard Hunt and Gordon Liddy, so former CIA, former FBI, are hired to form a new special investigations unit in the White House, which they later called the plumbers, because the Pentagon Papers had come out and they were trying to discredit the leaker Daniel Ellsberg, who leaked the yeah,
Oh
they were
yeah.
trying to discredit
Mm-hmm.
him,
Mm-hmm. I remember it.
which
Yeah.
also I guess would probably contribute to their animus toward the Washington Post. Mark Felt wiretapped Ellsberg and his psychiatrist
Oh,
phones, but then he wouldn't give the information to Hunt and Liddy. So then they go to the office to try to like photograph it and like break in. And yes, Liddy in this show, I don't know if this is true, but like in the show, Liddy is into guns and Hitler speeches.
nice.
The people in charge of them approved a break in with their ex CIA Bay of Pigs guys. So Barker,
That's
Diego
where they got the guys
Martinez.
then from Cuba.
Yeah, so they have them do they were supposed to break in and get Ellsberg's like psych files to be like, "Oh, this guy's crazy. You don't believe anything he says." But they like made a mess and they didn't find any files. So they thought they failed, but Nixon was like, "Oh, they're taking action. I'm impressed by them." So then he hired them to sabotage the Democrats. And then that's when their John Dean was like their contact.
Their liaison.
Yeah, at the White House. So they're trying to do all these different like sabotage operations. They're trying to like bring in like hookers and drugs and like photograph the Democrats with them. All this kind of stuff.
I thought it was interesting when Deep Throat said, in so many words, they they wanted uh, McGovern to be
Mm-hmm.
the nominee for the Democratic Party, and that's what they got. They arranged that because I guess they thought they knew that Nixon would beat him.
Mm-hmm.
So when you think about that, the big scheme of things, it's like that they arranged or facilitated that whole thing where he would be the Democratic nominee for president as opposed to Muskie.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's
You
funny
know,
because on sorry, go ahead.
no, I was going
It's
to a big what if,
yeah.
what if,
So on the Plumbers show, they actually tried to break into the Watergate like three times before they got in. So the
really?
time they were caught was the successful time.
That doesn't say much for what happened to the
Yes.
other two times. They just couldn't get the doors open or
So
something.
the first time Hunt can't get into the DNC office and Liddy can't get into McGovern HQ. They all so Liddy, Hunt, and the five and one other guy, Barker, Martinez, Gonzalez, another guy, Frank Sturgis. So it was McCord, the four Cubans, Frank Sturgis, Liddy, and Hunt all got in, but then they couldn't. They got into the building, but they couldn't pick the lock. to get into the DNC office.
And these guys were supposed to be the best.
Yes. So then on the third one, they get in, but the bugs don't work. So then they
Sorry.
got to go back in with new bugs and to actually get some files. And they had taped the door, but a
Oh,
security
so they
guard,
could go back in.
yeah. But in between those days, the security guard removed the tape. So then they have to sneak back in to tape the door again. And then that's when they get caught. And Barker had a letter with Howard Hunt's name and address, which is how Howard Hunt, because Howard Hunt was supposed to mail like on the show, he's supposed to mail like his kids like tuition or something.
Oh,
So he had a letter with his kid's tuition check that he was supposed to drop in the mail, but had like
male.
left it or something. So that's how he got caught. So I don't know how like accurate it all is, but that's how like Bob Woodward got Hunt's name because it was like
Okay.
on a thing in Barker's pocket. So it's so stupid. Like
Well, you think of the how high up all this went, and then you think of the ineptness of the people actually that they had, tried to get to do the actual, deeds and so on.
mhm.
It's like you're risking your entire political or professional lives and careers and everything on these five guys, and it's like this is, you know what I mean? It's like
Mhm.
all
Mhm.
this plotting and everything, and then it's like you hire the Three Stooges to, and you don't think anybody's going to connect the dots.
Yeah. It's
But you got to wonder. I mean, to me, it's like after they talked about like they didn't want Woodward and Bernstein on the doing the story because the higher ups said we want more seasoned reporters. You wonder if they, like you said, if they would have carried through with it, would they have even bothered, or would they just said, "Oh, there's nothing here. This is a big nothing burger." So
mhm.
interesting. That Well, I guess
Yeah.
that is history. It's all a series of events, and if they turn one way, it goes somewhere, and if they turn another way, it
Mm.
goes somewhere else.
Yeah. Just truly like the stupidest people that they could have
I know.
gotten to do these things. It's funny, and I think that is like the angle that like John or that William Goldman was thinking of because he was like, this is like a bunch of dunces trying to
Yeah.
do a conspiracy. But for obviously for but it was like a serious thing because of its
Oh,
implications for the
sure.
country.
Yeah.
And like obviously for Woodward and Bernstein, they were like fearing for their lives at some point. So I can understand why they would like be sour at the idea
Yeah, being a
a
little
of
making
it
light of
being
it.
comical.
But
So
I
I
thought
wonder what they thought of White House plumbers. They probably didn't like it.
probably not, but and I can see it from their perspective because
Yeah.
and this made them. So
Yeah.
I mean
Yeah.
they never had to buy a drink for the rest of their lives.
For
So
sure. Yeah, I think it shows, and I think the current situation we're in shows that people can be dumb goobers but still be dangerous.
oh,
Still cause a lot of damage.
most decidedly so, and sometimes they're the worst ones. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. It's like the ones that kind of go blundering in as opposed to the sneaky the skill of a surgeon as opposed to somebody with a bulldozer.
Yeah.
Just it's like
Perhaps like a chainsaw. Have we seen a chainsaw being waved around anywhere recently? Uh, hmm. That imagery seems prescient and
Leatherface.
familiar.
Am I thinking Leatherface? Oh, sorry, it's the movie as the.
Maybe just someone hopped up on ketamine,
Oh, 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 oh. Just saw
allegedly.
allegedly. So not I was not a movie to make you feel good, uh,
No,
per
no,
se.
especially not now.
So that being said, hopefully in the beginning, why I picked it a couple of reasons. It
Mm-hmm.
was on my list anyway. I thought maybe now would be an appropriate time to bring it up, though. So,
Mm-hmm.
and we are coming to the Academy Awards. So,
Yes, yes. So this one, Won a few.
Nominated for for a number
Yes.
of awards and
So it was nominated for Best Picture, Best Director, Best Supporting Actress for, I think, Sally, and Best Film Editing. So those it didn't win. But the ones it won, Jason Robards, who played Ben Bradley, won for Best Supporting Actor. William Goldman won for Best Adapted Screenplay, and it also won for Best Art Direction and Best Sound.
so that was one of the things Ben Mankiewicz brought up about the set, about the best art direction. That's that they recreated the the newsroom and with all the sound and the sound. He
Yes.
said they amplified it, uh, during the production or during the when they had done it. So it felt like you were just overwhelmed with the sound of typewriters and people talking and so on and so forth. So it was,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
yeah, I could.
Yes. Also, I want to correct myself. The woman who was nominated for Best Supporting Actress, that was the bookkeeper.
Oh,
Jane
and that
Alexander was the bookkeeper. She was only in one scene.
I in a very small scene, but she was very
Yeah.
good in it. So, and I
Yeah.
remember her from Great White Hope
Mm.
with James Earl Jones.
Ah, yes, I see that on
Um,
her
hmm
Wikipedia.
hmm Excellent, excellent movie. But she was very good in that as well.
Mm. She was
Um,
also in Kramer versus Kramer.
oh, I did not know. Well, see, there you go. See,
Lots of all these people overlapping.
well, I guess once you get your crew together, you start, you got your set of regulars, like John Ford had his back in the 40s, and Orson Welles had his back in the 40s, and
Mm-hmm.
so um, so did you seeing it for the second time? I mean, not that, like I said, it's not one of a movie you'd sit there and go, "Oh, I enjoyed seeing that movie," but
Mm-hmm.
I I think it's a movie worthwhile.
Yeah.
Um, I think it's well done, and I also think while it's a very dark part of our history, it is part of our history, and
Mm-hmm.
it needs to be. I think it needs to be seen and needs to be known.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, I agree. I agree. I think that's like really compelling, and the I think the performances are good, and I think that it's like a feat. I will just say, again, I like writing, so like shout out to William Goldman because like this is hard. It's like it can be dry, like
Hmm.
material, and he made it like compelling and interesting, obviously in conjunction with like the direction and the art direction and sound and the stars, but like just to be able to sort of define the story and again, it was a process.
Yeah, well,
Uh but
because that a big part of it was just them, showing them doing the research,
mhm.
gathering the information, and then, yeah, it's like, oh, you think how interesting can that be to watch somebody on the phone for like hours on hours on hours, or
Right, right.
interviewing people, but it did make it. You're right. The script made it. And I will say, I did not read the book. I had not read the book.
Yeah, me neither.
Um,
And I think too, even like the crimes are kind of boring. Money crimes are not exciting to me. This
yeah,
person paid money to this person and then they wrote a check to this guy and they called
and
it, it's just
mm,
like, oh yeah, 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 yeah. But I think that they did it in a way that was still compelling,
oh
like
yeah,
with the
yeah,
combination of everything. And also I cannot imagine sitting in front of Carl Bernstein and Nora Ephron and them being like, we rewrote your script,
I
which apparently Bob Woodward was not happy about.
about.
According to William Goldman, he's like,
Oh,
I can't
okay.
believe I let them do that.
Oh, okay. So,
But William Goldman says that this is the movie he wrote. So
because what Bob Woodward and Carl Bernstein wrote the book together, correct?
yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
so I wonder what kind of money they made off of the book and the movie.
I don't know. Probably a lot because they sold the option to Robert Redford. So
Yeah, but I wonder if they
um,
get residuals or anything, from any of
that's a
that.
good
So,
question. I wonder what was in the deal. And I
yeah,
mean, Bob Woodward has written like a book every few years too. So he keeps it
yeah. I mean,
churning.
and like you said, he's still called upon to do political commentary and so on.
Yeah,
So, and
both of them.
yeah, yeah. So, and I saw both of them are in their 80s now. So, but
Hmm.
it's
But they're
still in the mix, I guess.
still
So
kicking. The White House still takes Bob Woodward's calls, apparently.
evidently, so
Yeah. Also, this is like an aside, but it's from in William Goldman's book. He says that like, he was like tight with Robert Redford, right? Like
Oh yeah, well I guess
they're
so from being in the
yeah, so
Butch
like cuz
Cassidy and
when he wanted to work on it cuz he does Sundance, so he has a place in Utah and he
hmm
wanted Goldman to come to Utah, so Goldman came out with his family and they rented a place and like their wives would hang out and like their kids knew each other, but he did not have Robert Redford's phone number. He would not give him his phone number. So if he wanted
really,
to call him, he had to call his secretary and then she would give him a message and then he would call him back.
is that right?
Yeah. So it's like they're
There,
hanging out at each other's houses, do not have the phone number.
know, know your kids' birthdays,
Right.
had dinner with you, know your wife, or whatever, but yep, don't have your phone number and not going to get your phone number. That's interesting.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's funny. And also at the end of this chapter, William Goldman says this, and if you were to ask me, what would you change if you had your movie life to live over? I'd tell you that I'd have written exactly the screenplays I've written, only I wouldn't have come near All the President's Men.
Really?
Yeah.
Even though he won the Academy Award for it?
Yeah. And this is how he talks about that. He talks about seeing it at his local neighborhood theater. It seemed very much to resemble what I've done. Of course, there were changes, but there's always changes. But the structure of the piece remained unchanged, and it also seemed, with what objectivity I could bring to it, to be well directed and acted, especially by the stars. It won a bunch of Oscars and numberless other awards besides. That's his only reference to the
Really?
Oscars, including the one he won.
That he won
He's
for,
like,
yeah.
it won some awards, but it seems like this was such a like
He
stressful and turbulent experience
he wouldn't
that he's
trade.
like, I
I'll
would do
give it.
everything else I'd done except for
It's
this.
and I'm assuming this is the only Academy Award he ever won. Because
Um,
that would be saying something.
that would be kind of hilarious. He also won for Butch Cassidy.
Oh, okay. Well, there you go. So
Yeah.
maybe maybe it was a lot more fun to work with Paul Newman and Robert Redford than
Well, and he made that story up. He
yeah.
wasn't right. He wasn't sitting in front of the person he was
Well, no,
writing about.
no. There was a Butch Cassidy and a Sundance Kid. We know
Well,
that.
yes, but
Other
that
than
was an
that,
original screenplay. He wasn't adapting someone else's book that they wrote about their own lives.
that's true.
We'll say
Very
that.
true.
He
So
didn't he wasn't sitting in front of Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid
that's
and their
true.
girlfriends who wanted to rewrite it.
Yeah, that's true. Who
And
who
then
were
everybody
also
else hearing
who were
about that and going, "Ooh, you're having some problems, aren't you?"
yes, especially Walter. Because
Imagine Walter Cronkite being like, "Oh."
yeah. Oh, sorry to hear about you having some difficulties there with the old screenplay there.
How embarrassing.
Yes. So
But yeah, so he did a good job though. Shout out to
y-
William Goldman. May he
exactly. So
rest.
along with maybe some of the other choices we've had coming down the stretch. Of course, like we just finished celebrating Black History Month, and then we lead off March with this rousing crowd pleaser. So, but
Yes.
but I hope that our listeners will appreciate the selection, and if they have not seen the movie, try to give it a watch if you can.
Yeah. I think it's another one of those movies that's really impactful for a reason. Like
Mm-hmm.
it's held in high esteem for a reason. So I think that uh people should check it out. And I think, it puts our current political situation in a different context if you think about past ones that we've experienced. And again, it's like Oscar time, so this when you're listening to this, the Oscars will have
Right.
just happened.
Exactly.
And this was another kind of hit at the Oscars. It did not win Best Picture. Rocky won Best Picture that year. So, but also it was like this movie, Network, Rocky, like all the same year.
Yeah.
So
It was a good year for
it was
movies.
a pretty
So.
stacked year, pretty stacked
Mm-hmm.
year. So,
Well, thank
well,
you for indulging me with my selection. So,
of course, of
you know,
course.
we'll,
Um, yeah, I think also if you don't know about Watergate, Google it because there's a lot there. Like, this was a multi-year process, right? This is only like one little chunk of it. This is only kind of the beginning of people understanding what happened.
Right.
It got like deeper and deeper and bigger. And again, as like investigations closed in, Nixon was doing more and more. He like recorded people and all this kind of stuff.
And as you
It's
alluded to, this led to a lot of changes, sweeping changes in campaigns and how campaigns are run and how they're
mhm.
monitored and how the finances are reported and so on.
Yeah,
So,
I because like hearing it, what they were saying, I was like, well, you can't do, no one could do that. And I'm like, oh, this is why people can't do that.
well, why they're not supposed to do
This
that.
is
Yeah,
why there are laws against those things
exactly.
now.
Yeah. So before, yeah, this it was pretty much evidently a a free for all, but because of this period in our history that those some of those things have been addressed or were addressed. So
Yeah, exactly. Well,
well, I think we covered the
we've,
White House of yore.
I wonder what the movies about the current period will look like.
I don't know. Um, maybe maybe we'll have one come out as recent as this. This one came out 4 years after the
Yeah.
Watergate scandal broke. So we'll see what happens in the next 4 years. So
Yeah. I mean, we have Sebastian Stan in The Apprentice, but that's covering 80s Trump. That's
yeah,
when he was hanging out with Roy Cohn.
yeah. So
Anyways, maybe Sebastian Stan will win an Oscar for that. And then
ooh,
he could just do a Donald Trump. He could just, as he ages, just continue.
just just make it go full circle. Just
Exactly,
yeah.
exactly.
So
When
just carry.
Sebastian Stan's like 80, he
Yeah,
can do
he can do
this,
the whole
the current
arc.
era.
Yeah. So
Ugh.
anyway,
Anyways, what a
anyways,
world. What a world. Well, wherever you're listening to this, please be sure to subscribe so you can get all of our episodes that come out every Monday. Please leave a rating, review, a comment, especially a nice one, or we're gonna send Gordon, Liddy, and Howard Hunt after you. Just kidding, they're dead, but hypothetically. Follow us on Instagram at Some of Our Parts Pod. You can see all the movies that we've talked about, which is a diverse array. And we are coming up on episode 50 and a year of doing this podcast. So, plenty of options for you to review. You can also see little previews of what's coming next and whatever else we decide to share there. And with that, bye bye.
not a crook.